I'm Ramiro Salazar. I was born in Del Rio, Texas in 1954. I have fond memories of growing up on the border. Borderlands provide a different opportunity in terms of growing up and the experiences. So those folks that come from the border, we generally connect because it's a unique experience. There's two cultures that interconnect, and I think it's a great place to grow up. I feel very fortunate that Del Rio, being on the border, was my hometown. And it's a small city, relatively small, not so small that you only have one main street and a few stores. It's about 35,000 people right now. So I think it's just the right size for a city to grow up in. Well, it's a long story, but I like to tell the story because from my perspective, I feel that I've been very fortunate in the path that I've either has been laid out for me or that I carved for myself. But I first came to San Antonio as a college student. San Antonio College was my first college that I attended, and primarily because in Del Rio, being a small town, and I also came from the Latino part of the community. Del Rio, it's kind of split up in a way, not precisely, where there is a Latino community or Mexican American community called the San Felipe, barrio of San Felipe, and that's where I grew up. And generally, folks had a tendency of sticking together when we went outside the city or to college. So there's a group of six guys that decided to come to San Antonio to attend San Antonio College. We actually lived together in a house, and so it provided a support group for us. And so that was my first experience in San Antonio, obviously a large city, living here. And so that's how I ended up here. I come from limited resources. My parents didn't have the money to actually pay for college. They helped as much as they could. So we did work study, and I was assigned to the library here at SAC, and that was my first experience in working for a library. I was very fortunate that I had a great mentor. I still remember the name of the librarian who was in charge of the periodicals department. That was where I was assigned, Vel Pasca. I even remember the name of the administrative assistant who was responsible for all the student assistants that were assigned to that department. Her name was Sherry Berry. Interesting name. But Val Pasca, Mr. Pasca, was a good mentor. He provided guidance for us, emphasized the importance of responsibility and of serving the students as part of our work. And from here, I went on to Texas A&I University. It's now Texas A&M in Kingsville. But before I went there, I had to take a year off because my father became ill and I had to go home and help out. And lo and behold, I was hired by the local public library in Del Rio. And again, I had the good fortune of encountering another mentor who was a head librarian. Bess Bradley was her name. She was the chief librarian. I don't think she was called a library director at that time. I think they used chief librarian or head librarian. She took me under her wings and mentored me, gave me opportunities, made me her assistant, and so I learned a lot. So when word came to me by the social worker assigned to my family, look, we'll take care of your family, you go back to school. So I went. Texas A&I, which is now A&M in Kingsville, is the school that I decided to go to. My whole goal at that time, my career path, was to be a social worker. I wanted to help people. So I went on to Texas A&I University. I married shortly after that, so I went with a wife, and then a child came. So I needed to work full-time. At that time, I was also assigned to the university library. So kind of libraries have followed me throughout my life for some reason. It was not a chosen career path, but I believe in destiny, and I was destined to be a librarian. And so the local head librarian for that public library in Kingsville Elaine Scott. I remember all these names that have been very important to me. Served as a mentor. She worked around my college schedule. I was taking a full load of courses, had a wife and a young child, and she worked around my schedule. And she introduced me to librarianship further beyond what Ms. Bradley did, and introduced me to the library community. And I was, as part of that experience, I met some professors from Texas Women's University, the School of Library Science. And when I graduated in Kingsville, I was offered a fellowship. At that time, I was planning to, or my plan was to go to University of Michigan and get my social work. That school was considered to be one of the top schools for social work. And when the offer came for the fellowship in Texas Women's University, I was still waiting for word from University of Michigan regarding financial assistance. And so I thought about it. I spoke to my wife about it at that time, and I felt that, libraries also help people, and that's what I wanted to do. And so I picked Texas Women's University. I went there, got my master's in library science, and so then I became so-called a librarian. So my first professional job, as with a degree, a master's in library science, was Eagle Pass, another border community, smaller than Del Rio. And so that was my first professional job, my first, what I would call directorship. And, again, I believe in destiny. And I think I was meant to go there because Eagle Pass offers a pretty challenging environment. It's very political. The library was funded by both the county and the city. And there's a lot of cliques in Eagle Pass. And somehow, through the help of another mentor, Mr. Richard Perez, actually the same name as the chamber, who was the chair of the board, helped me navigate the political landscape there. So I obtained some additional experience in being a professional librarian. And then at that time, this idea of being a library director for a larger library system came to me. I said, I want to do that before the age of 40. And I know that I won't be hired from this small little library to a library, let's say Austin or San Antonio. So I decided to apply with the San Antonio Public Library. And so I was hired as the head of technical services. It was one of 3 administrative positions. The other was the head of main, and the third one was the head of branches. And so I came to San Antonio as the head of technical services. I was in charge of the budget, the purchasing of all the books and materials for the library. So it was an excellent experience. About a year and a half after I had been hired by the San Antonio Public Library, the only assistant director at that time of the library system retired. I applied along with my colleague who was the head of the main library. The head of her name's Nancy Gendera, by the way. She was selected. However, the board told the library director, Mike Sexton, who was the library director at that time, said, look, we like Ramiro. We want you to keep him. So he offered me a dual responsibility, head of main and head of technical services. And I accepted that responsibility. I felt strategically it will prepare me to be a library director of an urban library system, because I'm getting experience in the technical operations of the library as well as the public service aspect of library services. So that served me well. And I did that for about 4 years or so. And then El Paso came along, and I was hired as the director of libraries for El Paso, and that was my first directorship of an urban library system, a multi-branch library system. And so I was there almost 3 years before Dallas came knocking on my door and recruited me to be the head of the Dallas Public Library System. And so that was a huge move for me, and I loved El Paso so much that it was extremely difficult for me to make that decision. But I felt a city like Dallas and that kind of opportunity, that kind of a major arena, that kind of opportunity would not present itself often. I didn't think so. In spite of the fact that I hated leaving El Paso because it's such a wonderful city, such a wonderful community, and they embraced me as their library director, it was hard. So I went to Dallas, and also I wasn't sure I was tested enough in managing and running a large library system, but I figured I won't know unless you try it. I would try it. So I took the job with some not knowing how I would do, but it turned out to be pretty successful for me, and it was a wonderful experience in Dallas. What brought me to San Antonio 14 years ago is that at that time, both the Library Board of Trustees and the Library Foundation had been working on this initiative to create a library district that would provide some independence for the San Antonio Public Library and will provide a dedicated revenue stream for the library. And they had done some work at that time. They worked with the state legislature to pass enabling legislation to allow a city the size of San Antonio to have the opportunity to create a library district. So I came here. We did a lot of work. There was a lot of support, but at the end of the day, we weren't successful for various reasons. It didn't happen, but I love San Antonio. I already had roots here, and it's been wonderful. It's been a wonderful experience for me. And again, destiny. It was meant for me to come back to San Antonio and to lead the San Antonio Public Library. We have accomplished many things here, working with the board, working with the Library Foundation, working with city management, and working with mayor and council. There's two accomplishments that I'm very proud. There are many, but two key accomplishments. When I arrived here 14 years ago, the library was really not, from my perspective, part of the equation as it relates to building a greater city. Council members hardly ever mention libraries as an essential service. Community leaders hardly mention libraries as an important institution for creating a literate community, for advancing education, helping the educational system by providing resources, for advancing workforce development and economic development. They didn't see how the library could play an important role in those areas, especially raising the literacy rate and empowering people with information. So we started, again, working with the Library Board and the Library Foundation on a campaign to raise the library's profile in the arena of decision makers, community leaders, and so on. So we've made significant progress in that regard, and libraries now are mentioned as part of building a greater city. So that's one accomplishment. The fact that we added about 7 branch libraries also under my watch to expand our reach in the community and so that we can better serve the growing community is another accomplishment. I'm very proud of the fact that just 2 years ago we created a Latino Collection and Resource Center here at the Central Library. It had been a vision that had been articulated as part of the Libraries Foundation work and the committee that volunteered to advance services to Latinos and collections to Latinos. And we finally realized that vision or that dream 2 years ago. And so we created a space here at the Central Library, 7,000 square feet, offers a collection, offers some really cool spaces for programming and art gallery and for workshops. So it's a wonderful space. So that's something I'm very proud of. But again, I'm very fortunate to have a very talented and very committed team. Staff members throughout the community, throughout the branch library system are extremely devoted to public services. And so it makes my job easier. And my role is to provide the resources they need and provide guidance and direction in terms of our service priorities. And again, I feel very fortunate to be to have such a team that helps advance the efforts of the library. So going back when I first joined the San Antonio Public Library was 1984, if I'm precise. Yeah, I'm pretty 84. So at that time, it was called the main library. It later was changed to the central library. I wasn't here for that decision. There's probably a good reason for it. But at that time, it was the main library. It is now the International Center. And that's where Biga by the Banks restaurant's located. It's on the corner of Market and St. Mary's. That used to be the main library. That's where I used to work. And so it's pretty, I reminisce when I go down there for meetings, because we have meetings occasionally at the International Center. And I recall, hey, I used to wander this floors, 'cause I was in charge of the main library. So that was the library. And at that time, the San Antonio Public Library also had oversight of the Hertzberg Circus collection. In fact, when I was here in the 80s, I had multiple hats. I had a lot of responsibility. I had management oversight for the Hertzberg Circus Museum and the collection there. I was the liaison for adult literacy. Again, I was the head of the main library. I was head of technical services. I was head of the budgeting department. So when I think back, man, how did I get all that accomplished? But it provided a great portfolio for me and great experience to allow me to succeed in the jobs that came after that. They're all interesting. Eagle Pass, so I'll go one by one. Eagle Pass, again, very volatile politics. The dynamics there are very overt. You see it. You align yourself with this group, with that group. There's no in between, and to manage that in between, that's quite a task to accomplish. So that was the uniqueness of it, and the fact that it was my first professional job. It allowed me to learn a lot of things in the area of working with the board. I had a policy-making board, working on making budget requests, and so it allowed me to build my experience. Then coming here in San Antonio Public Library in the 80s, again, having an opportunity to experience responsibility in the many areas that I mentioned: technical services, public services, in the community with literacy, a special collection, the Hertzberg Circus collection, gave me some very unique experience opportunities. Then El Paso, being a border town, a larger border town, helping empower the community there through information was wonderful. And the way the community embraced me was so difficult to leave. Then Dallas, I recall when I took the job, folks would say, "You're crazy, Ramiro, going to Dallas in 1993. It's such a polarized city. The budget is in shambles. You're going to have a hard time." But my attitude was, well, it couldn't get any worse. So it can only go up, right? So that gave me some optimism. So I went to Dallas, and I was very fortunate. And it happened in El Paso too. And I'll tell you which community reached out to me. Not that others did not, but specifically the Jewish community in El Paso reached out to me and offered their assistance, Jewish leaders. In Dallas more so. And that helped me kind of learn the lay of the land in Dallas, having that kind of guidance and support and saying, "Ramiro, we want to help you." There were members in the Jewish community that were members of the Friends of the Dallas Public Library that had leadership roles, and they were very helpful in helping this kid. I still consider myself a kid. I was 40 years old at that time, to get acclimated and learn, because I was still wet behind the ears. I didn't have a lot of experience, 3 years in a large library system as director. I had a lot of experience in operational areas, but so Dallas provided that unique experience. And then the last year in Dallas, I was asked to serve as interim assistant city manager, and that gave me wonderful opportunity to look at the city management from close proximity and working with the city manager. So that was a wonderful experience. And then, of course, coming back to San Antonio, that's like my second hometown to me. Been here in the 80s, and both of my kids still lived here. One has moved to New York with her husband. The other one's still here. And so it brought me closer to family, as well as closer to my mom, who lives in Del Rio, still does. And so San Antonio is very unique, very special. The community is different. The difference between Dallas and San Antonio are very different. My wife often describes it this way. In Dallas, when folks want to know you, they invite you to a restaurant to eat. In San Antonio, when they want to know you, they invite you to their homes. And that's an accurate description of how San Antonio is and Dallas is. There's two things. One, coming from humble beginnings, from a family with limited resources. Now, we never were hungry. We always had a roof over our heads. But we didn't have, for example, we didn't take summer vacations. Okay, we didn't have that luxury. But there was always a lot of love, and there was always enough food on the table. But coming from that environment where resources are limited, you learn to be resourceful. You learn to be creative. I could tell you stories about some of my creative ways of living, like even hand-me-downs, so how shoes were repaired with electrical wire and things. I mean, that was the reality for us. And so learning to be resourceful is, I think, a very important skill set. Okay, so that's one. The other is, I tend to always be very strategic. I think strategically all the time. Even through my career, there was a reason why I picked San Antonio. There was a reason why I accepted additional responsibility. By the way, without a promise of additional pay, which didn't happen because the city at that time was having some budget problems. And I recall friends again telling me, "You're crazy. You're doing basically two jobs and you're not." And I said, "No, but this is experience that will pay off later." Okay, so it's about being strategic. So those two things, being resourceful, being strategic, is what I think has allowed me to be successful in my career and in my life. Well, you often hear, "Don't give up," but that's true. You never give up a dream. Having a vision for yourself is very important. Having a destination of and then realizing that it's a journey. I think that's very important. So, not to be discouraged. My advice to a high school student would be never get discouraged, because you're going to fall down on that path. You just get up and you continue, because there will be some disappointments, but you can't be discouraged by those disappointments. You got to continue to move forward.